At LV524 local time, this Russian Su-25 pilot was on a mission that defied every lesson the VKS had learned in 2 years of grinding attrition warfare. A close air support sortie over Bakhmut, to airspace where Ukrainian and NPATS teams had turned low-altitude flight into statistical suicide. But what it was about to encounter would force every Air Force doctor and writer to reconsider what air superiority actually means when the sky belongs to whoever can see fastest. The mission briefing said the corridor was suppressed. Said strikes had rolled to an hour earlier. Ukrainian air defense was supposed to be blind, degraded, reactive. The briefing was 6 hours old. And he was about to learn exactly how much the situation had changed at 650 kilometers per hour. The Su-25 Rockfoot screamed north at 150 meters. Engines howling, terrain brain-blooding beneath him into a smear of broken tree lines and shell-cratered fields. This was the final approach. Russian controlled territory behind him, the contact line ahead 5 kilometers to the release point, where he'd triple fire unguided rockets at Ukrainian positions that artillery couldn't reach, and then get out before something got him first. The armored bathtub surrounding his cockpit could stop 23mm cannon fire. It couldn't stop what was waiting for him in the trees below. His radar warning receiver was silent. No search radars, no tracking systems, no fire control computers painting him with electromagnetic energy. The SIAT strikes had worked. Ukrainian S-300 batteries were cold. Their Buk systems weren't radiating. The long-range threats that had savaged Russian aviation for months were somewhere else, doing something else, and the corridor was exactly as advertised. Clear. Except it wasn't. And the first indication came not from his instruments but from his eyes. A flicker of movement at 2 o'clock, 800 meters out, low against the tree line. Small, fast, climbing toward him. His brain processed the shape before his training caught up. Quadcopter, commercial frame, FPV racing drone doing maybe 180 kilometers per hour, angling to intercept his flight path. Not reconnaissance, intercept geometry. The pilot's hand moved toward the countermeasure dispenser and stopped. Flares were designed for heat-seeking missiles, not drones with human operators watching through goggles. His chaff was useless. His radar warning receiver stayed silent because there was no radar to warn him about. The threat climbing toward him at 50 meters per second wasn't using any sensor his aircraft was built to detect. It was just a camera, battery, and 5 kilograms of high explosive guided by a human being sitting in a tree line he'd never see. He banked hard right, dumping altitude, trying to break the intercept angle. The G-forces pushed him into his seat as the Su-25 carved to air at the edge of its turn radius. At 150 meters, he was trading maneuverability for survival time. The drone adjusted, following his turn, narrowing the geometry. Whoever was flying that thing had practiced this exact scenario, drilling the intercept angles, learning how fast the frogfoot could turn and what its blind spots were. The pilot was fighting an opponent who'd studied him. The drone close to 400 meters. The pilot could see it now through the canopy, a dark speck growing larger, rotors invisible at this speed. Just a shape with intent. He rolled inverted and pulled negative G, pushing him against his harness, trying to throw the drone's tracking. The maneuver worked for exactly 3 seconds. The drone followed the roll, adjusted its dive angle, kept closing. 300 meters. His Su-25 was doing 680 kilometers per hour. The drone was doing maybe 200, but it didn't need to match his speed. He just needed to be where he was going to be in the next 4 seconds. The math was brutally simple. Close air rate 480 kilometers per hour. Distance 300 meters. Time to impact 2.2 seconds. His options had just reduced to 1. The pilot shoved the throttle to full military power and dove. Not a calculated evasion. Just raw physics, trading every meter of altitude he had for speed the drone couldn't match. His airspeed indicator climbed through 720 kilometers per hour as the ground rushed up. 100 meters, 80. The drone was still closing but losing angle, its maximum velocity insufficient to follow a powered dive. At 50 meters, the pilot leveled out so low that individual trees were flashing past his wingtips. The drone fell behind, unable to maintain the dive angle. The pilot exhaled. One threat evaded. He was alive, of course, and now flying at an altitude where Ukrainian infantry with Stingers had unobstructed shots at his engine exhaust. The corridor that was supposed to be safe had just proven it was anything but. And he was still 4 kilometers from the release point with a full rocket pod that wasn't getting any lighter. He adjusted course northeast, hugging terrain, eyes scanning for the next threat. His situational awareness had collapsed to a 500-meter bubble. Anything beyond that was just landscape. Anything inside that bubble was something he might see in time to react. Might. The radio crackled. Broken transmission, heavy static, a voice he barely recognized from ground control. Garage 2 corridor contested, Ukrainian counter-US active. Recommend abort. Then nothing. The jamming that was supposed to protect him was also blinding him. It was along with a map reference, a target coordinate, and the knowledge that someone below was actively hunting aircraft at his altitude, with weapons his sensors couldn't detect. He checked his fuel. 20 minutes of loiter time before bingo. The release point was 3 minutes ahead if he maintained this heading. 3 minutes through airspace where every tree line could hide an operator with goggles and a controller, launching drones he wouldn't see until they were inside 1,000 meters. The mission was still valid. His ground forces were counting on those rockets, and every second he hesitated was another second for Ukrainian air defense to reposition. The pilot pushed the throttle forward and stayed low. The 12C cone window. Part 2. At 60 meters altitude, the Su-25 was threading through a valley system that didn't exist on his map from 2021. 2 years of artillery had reshaped the terrain. What should have been gentle hills were now crater fields. What should have been forests was now skeletal tri-lines stripped bare by thermobaric weapons. His navigation was reduced to terrain recognition that kept failing because the terrain didn't match anymore. Then his peripheral vision caught movement. Left side 200 meters out, multiple contacts. Not one drone. 6, maybe 8. Rising from a tree-line in formation, climbing toward intercept altitude. They weren't racing drones. These were larger, slower, methodical. Baba Yaga hexacopters, the heavy-lift platforms Ukrainian forces had started weaponizing in autumn. Each one carried 10 kilograms of payload. Some dropped munitions on trenches. Others dropped munitions on aircraft stupid enough to fly predictable routes at altitudes where physics favored the drone. The pilot's training set to climb, gain altitude, force the drones to burn energy chasing him vertically. His instinct said that climbing meant exposing himself to everything else. Manpad's teams waiting for exactly that reaction. The drones weren't the kill mechanism. They were the bait, pushing him up into engagement envelopes he successfully avoided by staying low. He held altitude and turned hard left toward the drones, closing the angle. Not evasion. Aggression. At 60 meters and 700 kilometers per hour, he was betting that he could pass beneath them before they adjusted. The gamble lasted 4 seconds. The hexacopters descended, matching his altitude, spreading formation. Whoever was coordinating them understood intercept geometry. They weren't trying to catch him. They were trying to block every heading that didn't put him in a climb. His eyes tracked the lead drone, 800 meters, 600 point. It was dropping something, a dark shape separating from the hexacopter's undercarriage, falling with intent. Not a bomb. Bombs fell ballistically. This was tracking, adjusting, a smaller drone released from a larger one, a dropper carrying an FPV kamikaze. The Ukrainians had weaponized their weapons. The pilot rolled right and off for the deck. 50 meters, 40. The dropped FPV couldn't match his speed, but it didn't need to. It just needed him to stay in the engagement zone for another 3 seconds. Behind him, the FPV's camera was transmitting to an operator who was flying blind through instinct and practice, aiming at where the front foot would be, not where it was. At 30 meters, the para was low enough that his engine wash was kicking up dust trails behind him. The FPV lost track in the ground clutter. Its operator, flying on instruments in a tree line 7 kilometers away, lost the visual reference and pulled up reflexively, aborting the intercept. The drone climbed back toward its mother hexacopter while the Su-25 raced northeast at maximum continuous power. His radar warning receiver finally came alive. Not the silence of suppressed air defense, the urgent warble of a tracking system going active. A Ukrainian OSA-AKM battery, vehicle-mounted mobile, exactly the kind of short-range threat that SEAD strikes couldn't find because it moved after every engagement. The system was radiating from somewhere to the east, building a firing solution. Range approximately 8 kilometers. At his current heading and speed, he'd be inside minimum engagement range in 40 seconds. The release point was 2 kilometers ahead. The OSA could fire in 20 seconds if the crew was competent. He had a choice: abort now and live, or press through and hope 40 seconds was enough time to release and evade before the missile left his rail. The pilots checked his weapons panel: 40 S-8 unguided rockets, each one carrying 3.6 kilograms of high explosive. Once released, they fly ballistic trajectories for 5 seconds before impacting the coordinates his mission computer had stored. No guidance, no precision, just mass fires on a grid square where Ukrainian infantry were entrenched. They kept their heading. 30 seconds to release point. The OSA was still tracking, radar energy painting him, fire control computers calculating where he'd be when the 9M33 missile reached intercept altitude. His countermeasure dispenser was loaded. His flares might distract an infrared seeker. They do nothing against a command-guided missile that followed radar illumination from its launcher. The only defense against the OSA was terrain masking, and there was no terrain tall enough between him and that battery. 20 seconds. Another flicker of movement. Right side 400 meters climbing fast. Solo. FPV, different model, carbon fiber frame, racing configuration. It wasn't trying to intercept his aircraft. It was trying to intercept his flight path, positioning itself where he'd be in 5 seconds. The pilot's mind processed the geometry instantly. The drone operator had predicted his approach to the release point and pre-positioned, gambling that the Su-25 wouldn't deviate. The gamble was correct. Deviating now meant aborting the mission. The pilot held course. 15 seconds to release. The FPV was at 80 meters, hovering, waiting. The OSA was still building its solution. And somewhere below, Ukrainian infantry, who'd been getting hammered by Russian artillery for 3 weeks, were about to receive the one thing they wanted more than ammunition. A Russian pilot flying straight and level exactly where they expected him. 10 seconds. The pilot's thumb moved to the weapon's release. His eyes tracked 3 threats simultaneously. The OSA radar painting him, the FPV positioned in his path, and the hexacopter somewhere behind him, repositioning for a second intercept attempt. He was flying through a 3-dimensional chess game where every piece wanted him dead, and the only move that mattered was forward. 5 seconds. His mission computer showed release parameters optimal. He pressed the trigger. The Su-25 shuddered as 40 rockets rippled from their pods in a sustained 4-second burst, each one launching with a crack and a flash, motors igniting, warheads arcing toward coordinates 2,000 meters ahead. The aircraft backed with each release, shedding weight, gaining speed. The pilot didn't watch them fly. He was already moving. Stick hard left, full afterburner, dumping flares in a continuous stream. The FPV that had been waiting in his path was suddenly 200 meters behind him, its operator cursing in Ukrainian as his carefully positioned intercept turned into a stern chase he couldn't win. The OSA fired. A wide Contra punched upward from a tree line 6 kilometers east, the 9M33 missile climbing on a column of smoke, accelerating toward the intercept point its computer had calculated 3 seconds ago when the Su-25 was still on its original heading. The pilot was no longer on that heading. He was turning inside the missile's engagement geometry, forcing it to adjust, burning energy on maneuvers it hadn't planned for. At 40 meters altitude, screaming through a turn that pushed the airframe to structural limits, he was betting his life on one fact. The 9M33 was designed to intercept aircraft flying predictable profiles at medium altitude. It was flying unpredictably at the deck. The missile adjusted, following radar guidance from the OSA's fire control system. But radar guidance requires line of sight, and line of sight at 40 meters altitude meant the missile had to descend into ground clutter, while tracking a target doing 740 kilometers per hour through terrain that scattered radar returns like a broken mirror. The 9M33 seeker lost lock for 2 seconds. The acquired no force return. Corrected. Lost lock again. Its onboard computer, designed in the 1970s, made the best decision it could with the information it had. It commanded proximity detonation. The warhead exploded 180 meters behind the Su-25, close enough to rattle the pilot's teeth, too far to do more than pepper his tail surfaces with fragments. Red warning lights flashed across his panel. Hydraulic pressure fluctuating, starboard stabilizer damaged, fuel flow irregular. He was flying, still alive, bleeding fluids, and 38 kilometers from the nearest airfield that might have the parts to fix him. Behind him, 40 rockets impacted Ukrainian positions in a rolling cascade of explosions. No precision, no surgical strikes, just 144 kilograms of high explosives scattered across 400 meters of trenches. The mission recorder would classify it as successful. The ground forces would report enemy suppression achieved, and the pilot would file a report that nobody would believe about drones acting like fighter aircraft and missiles that almost killed him in airspace that was supposed to be clear. He crossed back into Russian-controlled territory at 0531, 7 minutes after entering Ukrainian airspace. His hydraulics were failing. His fuel was critical. His starboard stabilizer was responding at 60% effectiveness. He had 12 minutes of flight time before either his fuel ran out or his hydraulics failed completely, whichever came first. The mathematics were unforgiving. He made it to the airfield at 0542. Gear down, flaps damaged, landing on emergency hydraulics with a tailwind that put him 40 km per hour faster than recommended touchdown speed. The Su-25 hit the runway hard, bounced, settled and rolled to a stop with brake temperatures in the red and fuel indicators showing vapor. The pilot shut down the engines and sat in the cockpit for 4 minutes, hands still on the controls, breathing through the adrenaline that had kept him functional for the last 18 minutes. The ground crew who met him at the aircraft looked at the damage and went silent. Tail section perforated with fragment holes. Hydraulics lines leaking. Starboard stabilizer bent at an angle that shouldn't allow controlled flight. The crew chief asked what happened. The pilot said drones. The crew chief said drones don't do that kind of damage. The pilot said they do now. The after-action report was filed at 0021. Mission success. Target engaged. Ordnance delivered. Aircraft damaged but recoverable. Recommended tactics: avoid low-altitude corridors, maintain high-speed egress, assume all airspace is contested, regardless of CD effectiveness. Recommended equipment: none. Cut-and-go measures ineffective against visually guided threats. The report reached BKS headquarters by 0800. It was read by staff officers who would spend careers planning for missile threats and radar-guided systems. They read about commercial drones acting as interceptors, about FPVs positioning for ambush intercepts, about hexacopters releasing kamikaze submunitions. The report was classified, distributed to doctrine writers, and filed alongside 47 other reports from the past 6 weeks describing the same phenomenon. The conclusion was inescapable. Air superiority no longer meant controlling the electromagnetic spectrum or suppressing ground-based radars. It meant seeing faster than the threat, reacting quicker than physics allowed, and accepting that the sky now belonged to whoever had the best eyes and the fastest reflexes. Not radar. Not infrared. Just Mach 1 human eyeballs trying to spot dinner plate-sized objects moving at closing speeds that gave you 2 seconds to live or die. The Ukrainian operators who'd flown those drones never knew if they hit anything. Their cameras showed a frogfoot maneuvering violently, then disappearing below the tree line. Maybe they scored a mission kill. Maybe they just forced an abort. In drone warfare, success was measured in sorties disrupted, not aircraft destroyed, and that Su-25 pilot would think twice before flying that corridor again.